Hi everyone, it's me, Arden Lee, and today I want to make a video about what is chaos magic. I want to talk a little bit about what it is and why I got into it, like a nice little introductory video about magic and my history with it, kind of like the videos I thought I was going to be making before this whole deal with the devil thing happened. So chaos magic is the type of magic that I practice. I consider myself a chaos magician. And essentially what chaos magic is it is results-based magic. Rather than coming from any specific tradition or having any set ways of doing things or rules or laws about how magic should be done, how magic traditionally has been done, chaos magic basically says, we're really more interested in whatever variable we need to put into the equation in order to get the result that we want. And so we're going to play around and we're going to experiment with things, and we're not going to stay too attached to any one way of doing things or any particular ideas about how magic may work, how the universe might work, how reality itself indeed might work. If there is any attachment to any belief or way of being that ends up not ultimately serving us, as well as perhaps changing it up into another one would. Hope that makes sense. And the reason that I chose chaos magic as a practice when I was just starting to intentionally explore magic was honestly because I was afraid of not being believed. I grew up with a lot of gaslighting. And I definitely, at that point in my life, I was definitely coming out of a time in my life where there was a lot of, how do I say this? Things like, anything related to the supernatural, anything that was like, witchy, occult, new age, anything, I'm just gonna say it, anything that could be mocked as being feminine was not safe for me if I wanted to be accepted. I got my NLP certification, my neuro-linguistic programming certification, which is right behind me on the wall. I got that when I was back in New York, and in the communities where I was hanging out, it was very there was a lot of masculine energy around me that was a lot thought, at least it thought it was a lot about logic and being rational and things that, a lot of scientific materialism. So for me to be oh, I think I'm gonna, become a pagan or a Wiccan, I'm gonna go howl around a bonfire at the moon, that would have resulted in a lot of judgment and derision. And since I was still coming out of that sort of fear-based conditioning around those patterns, chaos magic was the safest one for me to choose, because I'm look, this is just a system where I do the thing that works. And if it works, then it doesn't matter. I don't even need to believe in it, right? If I'm getting the results, then obviously it works. It's sort of if you take a placebo, right? If you take a placebo and it makes you better, and then someone's gonna come along and say, oh, that's not even a real thing, that pill is just a placebo, I'd be so I'm better, it worked, right? So that's what was appealing to me personally about chaos magic when I chose it. And I will say that even though since then I have opened my mind to a whole ton of things that that I now believe that I wouldn't have been able to believe before, I still really like it as a system, because for my own purposes of having a magical practice, I want to use it to be able to create change in my reality. I want it to be able to use it to make my life circumstances better. I want to use it to be happier, to be more playful, to have fun, and to play around and experiment and see what works, in terms of what's going to affect my reality. I'm going to talk in this video a little bit about the principles of chaos magic as I now understand them, having been practicing chaos magic for about maybe 6 or 7 years now. But before I get into talking about those, I want to talk a little bit about what my sort of process of awakening into chaos magic was like. Because what was funny about it was that as soon as I decided, all right, I guess I'm going to be a chaos magician, I'm going to try this and I'm going to see how it works for me, sure, I ordered a bunch of books about it because obviously that's, what one would do. But I didn't really get very far in my reading at the time. I ordered this book, The Book of Lies. It's the Disinformation Guide to Magic and the Occult. The preface is by Grant Morrison, and I basically read pretty much up to the preface and that first chapter in which Grant says how to be a magician. Simple. Declare yourself a magician, behave like a magician, practice magic every day. And this is, as you can see, this is like so early into the book, right? He basically says read a lot of books on the subject to get in the mood, etc., etc. But then he very quickly says after that, put down the books, stop making excuses, and start. So that's kind of what I did at the time, and what happened next was pretty unbelievable. I started launching sigils, which I'll make a video explaining how to do that a little later, but it's basically a way of setting an intention, casting a spell around it. And all of a sudden, Magick just started working and showing up in my life. And the way that it was showing up required that I address my past trauma, my healing process, all of the beliefs and patterns and the ways of being, you know, that like basically every reason that my life had not been working out the way that I wanted it to thus far. Everything that I was repeating, everything I was believing, everything that I was doing, that all came up to be addressed. I ended up going on this super epic journey, this sort of, you know, trauma healing journey of reconciling my past and understanding like why, like how all of that had been stored in my body, why I might still be responding to situations around me as though my trauma were still ongoing, or as though, you know, as though the world was still as unsafe for me as it had been during when my trauma was happening and then when I was repeating that trauma. And the resources that I ended up going to ended up being predominantly things like a lot of research around trauma healing and the mechanics of trauma and how it functions, what it does to your mind-body system. Also addiction research, because even though I did not have specifically any issues with substance misuse, there were patterns in my life that essentially were, that I came to recognize as being indistinguishable from addiction. Personally, now I define addiction as a pattern that we have overlearned beyond its usefulness. And I also studied attachment styles. I reviewed all the NLP stuff that I had studied years earlier. And I also started looking at larger patterns of global sustainability and my role in the world, et cetera, et cetera. Basically, you know, I had what anyone would call a spiritual awakening. And I began to understand that very thing that I was just explaining about chaos magic that had drawn me to it in the first place. That idea of, I want to know, I want to have the mindset of thinking about what variable do I put into this equation in order to get the result that I want. And I brought together everything that I had learned into one singular body of work that I ended up naming the Repatterning Project, and basically dedicating my entire life to, especially because most of the things that I was doing before my awakening were not going to prove sustainable in the long run, as my awakening had shown me. It's not my intention to make this video into like an infomercial about it, although I am wearing the shirt today because these are new, just got the shirts in. But I will say, just for the sake of putting the information out there, that I teach this course twice a year, once in summer and once in winter. And if you are watching this video soon-ish after it's been posted, I am currently enrolling for the summer 2020 run round. It's an 8-week course. I teach it live on Zoom and on Facebook. It is about that understanding of what variable do I put into the equation, what belief, what mindset, what do I need to have to get the results that I want in my life. And it's pretty wild because I went through this process and I documented it and I created the course out of it. But what I was able to finally understand and integrate about my experience was that I had basically just said, all right, well, I guess I'm going to declare myself a magician and I'm going to start practicing magic every day, just as Grant Morrison, who would later go on to mentor me in magic as well, had written about. And I had an awakening via the path of chaos magic just because I had started practicing. That to me is proof that magic is real. So after I had fully digested all of that process and assimilated it into my understanding of my experience, I finally had some time to sit down and read some of the books on chaos magic. And I found that how chaos magic was being described was pretty core to everything that I was teaching. So basically, I declared myself a chaos magician. I started casting spells, and chaos magic kind of showed up for me of its own accord, which is pretty cool. So I'm going to discuss some of the principles of chaos magic now, and I'm going to use Condensed Chaos, an introduction to chaos magic by Hine, because of all the books that I have read on chaos magic so far. This section, the core principles of chaos magic, is the one that to me has felt the most clear, the most resonant, and the most aligned with what I believe and teach myself. So I'm going to share a little bit of it with you. The first core principle of chaos magic is the avoidance of dogmatism. So we're not really interested in someone saying that something is true just because they say it's true, or that this is the way that things should be done just because this is the way that they have always been done. And this resonates for me a lot. For someone who practices magic, I can be kind of a skeptic. And so I'm not really interested in performing certain rituals in certain ways or doing certain traditions just because other people have done them that way. Naturally, I'm respectful of other people's traditions and of other people's beliefs, but if they're not my traditions, I don't see any reason why I should have to follow rules just because someone says so. I would rather try something out for myself and see how it works. And yeah, sure, part of that is also about doing the thing right to see if it works, but I want to see that it works before I accept it as something that is going to work for me. I know I might get some flack for saying this, but it is 2021. I would not want to be using the same kind of medicine, for example, that Aleister Crowley was using when he was alive, so I'm not sure I want to use the same magic rituals either. Principle number 2, personal experience is paramount. Hine says, in other words, don't take my word that such and such is the case, check it out for yourself. That kind of goes with what I was saying before too. I also believe in this as a teacher, by the way, because if something isn't working for someone that I'm working with, then I'm interested in finding the thing that does work for them, right? And that's sort of the meta belief that I lead with in my facilitation, is figuring out the thing that is going to work. Principle number 3, technical excellence. Hine says, one of the early misconceptions about chaos magic was that it gave practitioners carte blanche to do whatever they liked, and so become sloppy or worse, soggy in their attitudes to self-assessment, analysis, etc. Not so. I want to also mention that in contemporary times, when we're especially dealing with issues of cultural appropriation in a lot of magical circles, chaos magic is not about just taking something and making it your own or appropriating it, because that's not only appropriative, it's also bad magic. Like, imagine if you try and take something from a closed practice and it's not yours, like, that's not what the practice is for, and so it's probably not going to really work very well for you. So I just want to state for the record that being a chaos magician is not an excuse for any kind of appropriation. In fact, chaos magic is about finding what works for you. So if a tradition is not for you, it's probably not going to work for you. Principle number 4, deconditioning. This is where it gets really interesting, in my opinion. The chaos paradigm proposes that one of the primary tasks of the aspiring magician is to thoroughly decondition himself from the mesh of beliefs, attitudes, and fictions about self, society, and the world. Our ego is a fiction of stable selfhood, which maintains itself by perpetuating the distinctions of what I am and what I'm not, what I like, what I don't like. Using deconditioning exercises, we can start to widen the cracks in our consensual reality, which hopefully enables us to become less attached to our beliefs and ego fictions, and thus able to discard or modify them when that's appropriate. And that is essentially what I feel I learned a process and system for, that I then put into the Repatterning Project. So yeah, going on that whole spiritual awakening journey, creating a course around it, and then kind of emerging from that particular abyss, only to come back to the books and read that paragraph. Yeah, that was pretty trippy. 5, diverse approaches. As mentioned earlier, traditional approaches to magic involve choosing one particular system and sticking to it. I just didn't feel like I had to be loyal to any certain system. There was none that was really calling me. And again, the thing that I wanted most was not, I was raised Catholic and Lutheran. I didn't want another sky god to believe in. I wanted a system that was going to create results in my life. The chaos perspective, if nothing else, encourages an eclectic approach to development, and chaos magicians are free to choose from any available magical systems, themes from literature, television, religions, cults, parapsychology, etc. Again, this is not advocating that you just steal from a closed practice, because, again, if it's not meant for you, it's probably not going to work for you. And it's also just insensitive. So being insensitive is a variable that will affect the results that you get in your life. So as a chaos magician, I advise everyone, be sensitive. It's just better. You get to, be a better person, make better friends. And the principle of diverse approaches also means that to be a chaos magician, even though I acknowledge that chaos magic has its own history and its own sort of culture around it, for me, even chaos magician is a label. If there ever comes a day where being a chaos magician is not the variable that works best for me to get the results in my life, then as a true chaos magician, I would get rid of that label and I would become something else. And finally, core principle number 6, Gnosis. And I believe what Hine is speaking about here is conversation with the divine, an ability, basically he says, to enter into altered states of consciousness at will, and understanding and being a master of navigating different trance states and states of altered consciousness. And again, I'm pretty lucky in that regard that I already had an NLP, timeline therapy, and hypnosis certification from my time spent in New York. So I have known how to self-induce hypnotic trance for a while now. And that concludes just about everything that I want to say about chaos magic in this video. So I'll leave you with one last quote. This is my favorite quote from Robert Anton Wilson's Sex, Drugs, and Magic, and this is the new edition that just came out from Hilaritas Press, which I was very, very honored to be included as a writer in, with some other amazing and very notable voices. In this volume, I contributed an afterword. See, there's me, yay. So here's the quote I'll leave you with. The distinction between desire and reality can safely, even profitably, be ignored by the psychedelic experimenter. Whatever you truly believe you can do, you actually can do. Any limits to this statement are themselves axioms of impotence to be transcended by reprogramming your belief system. New limits discovered after this reprogramming has taken place are further errors to be removed by further reprogramming. If this process does not continue to infinity, it continues far longer than one is willing to believe before attempting such mind expansion. And what I will say about that last quote is that adopting that as my attitude in life, that whatever the gap is between where I am now and where I want to be, if I can solve that with my beliefs and my behaviors and my choices and my actions and how I approach the world and the mindset with which I approach the world, then I want to do that. And anytime I try that and it doesn't quite get me there, it's another opportunity to try again. And what this has done for me, I don't want to oversimplify it because it's been a huge journey in itself. But essentially what I believe this mindset has done for me is it's cured my depression. It's given me a system by which I can interact and interface with the world and have some power over the variables that I contribute to it, which means that I have some power over the results that I get. And I understand those variables and those results far, far better than I ever did years ago, when I was being shuffled around the mental health industrial complex, told that I had anxiety and depression, et cetera, being put on a bunch of meds that I am thankfully am no longer on. So that's my journey and my feelings about chaos magic. So if you feel like you want to try it, see how it works for you, just start doing magic. Reach out to me if the Repatterning Project sounds like the initiatory process that you'd like to go through, and tell me what you think about it in the comments. Thanks so much, guys. Hope this was helpful. I'll see you next time.